cooks off to you next. Our Parsha Vayakel begins immediately following the story of the rupture of the golden calf. A small but significant portion of Israelites committed idolatry, and the Levites were commanded to kill them in retribution. After that, God sent a plague through the entire Israelite community and declared to the Israelites essentially, "You have made me so angry, and I'm not over it. It's time to get up. You got to get out of here. Time to leave Mount Sinai. And I'm going to make sure that your enemies don't get you. I'm going to ultimately protect you, but I'm still so mad at you that I can't travel with you. So I'm not going to be that pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that I was before. You're going to have to go on your own because I can't trust myself not to destroy you." And the Torah says that when the people heard this harsh word from God, they went into mourning and they stripped themselves of all the finery that they were wearing. So this is clearly a people in the aftermath of this event that are traumatized and grieving and broken apart. So we begin this week with this Parsha, Vayakel, with Moses trying to piece his community back together. And it starts with this. Vayakel Moshe et kol adat bnei Yisrael, vayomer alehem el hadavarim asher tziva Adonai la'asot otam. Moses then gathered the whole Israelite community together and said to them, "These are the things that God had commanded you to do, has commanded you to do." Vayakel, of course, is from the root kuf he lamed, like kihila, to gather together in community. So Moses' task now is to create unity from division through two sacred building projects. One, a building project of sacred time of creating Shabbat, and two, a building project of sacred space of creating the Mishkan. And he says, your task in building the Mishkan your task, Israelites, is to contribute whatever gifts and skills you have to offer in building the shared sacred space. Do you have blue or purple or crimson yarn? Great, we need all of that. Are you a skilled woodworker? We need people to measure and carve the beams and the poles. Are you a weaver? Amazing, spin the thread, spin the goat's hair. We need every single last one of you with all of your specific skills and resources. We need all of you, men and women and children, to give the thing that you have to give, to share the talent that you uniquely bring to make this whole project work. And a commentator named Ramban, known as Ramban, also known as Nachmanides, notes that Moses is really intentional to include the entire community in his instruction. The last time, before the golden calf, that he gave instructions about the construction of the Mishkan, it was just to the priests and to the communal leaders. But this time around, every single person, every gender, every age needs to be reminded of their shared mission to build this sacred space together, even and perhaps especially after this rupture of the golden calf and the breaking of the tablets. And he says, Ramban says, that they might have thought after this literal and figurative breaking that they were done, that the project that they had been commanded on before the golden calf was abrogated. Like, we're done, God's done with us, there's nothing left for us to do, God's given up on us totally. But Moses says, no, it's not true. We need every single one of you to build this together so that God can still ultimately dwell among us and within us so we can begin anew. And I think Moses, in his ever so slowly growing wisdom as a leader, recognizes that this is the path back to healing for his community. Not to achieve unity through homogeneity, but to achieve unity of purpose through amplifying and recognizing the uniqueness and diversity that each person brings. Our Jewish community has experienced profound trauma and rupture since October 7th. And in some ways, especially in the early days after October 7th, this trauma strengthened the unity of the Jewish people in the way that uniting against a common enemy often does. When I was in Israel, I heard over and over again this common theme from so many Israelis about how fractured the relationships both between Israelis and Jews of the diaspora, and particularly Jews of North America, had felt, and also the relationships between Israelis themselves, how fractured they had been leading up to in the months before, in the year before October 7th, up to the day before. And so the unity that emerged almost immediately after Hamas's attack was like the one saving grace. And I heard them say over and over again that we cannot let ourselves return to the division of the before times. That this division internally was the source of our weakness, and Hamas capitalized on that division, and if they do that again, we'll be destroyed. But I'm seeing more and more these days, even as we're struggling to hang on to that feeling of unity, of achdut, I'm feeling the cracks within our Jewish community starting to break open. I'm seeing places where there is significant difference about where our concerns and priorities should be at this moment. Fundamentally different visions for Israel, for Zionism, fundamental differences about the root causes of suffering and the obstacles to enduring peace. Here's one example about what it looked like recently in our own community when some of these little divisions started to emerge. Some of you were here at this, but at the Sunday afternoon panel we held here at Or Hadash, 2 weeks after my Federation trip returned from Israel, we held an event where almost all of the participants, rabbis and professional leaders, were up here on the bima, as it were, talking about our experience, sharing stories, sharing vignettes, and learning. And this unity was a common theme. And I think for many folks, I was just sharing this with Steve, it was the first time they had ever seen representatives from such a wide range of our Jewish community sharing space together, not just civilly, but actually seeming to enjoy, like really enjoying, not just an act, like enjoying each other's presence, from Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. And this was true. I felt like on our group, this real unity formed in an organic and actually quite beautiful way around this shared love for Israel. But there were two particular moments that afternoon that kind of highlighted moments of division or moments of absence, of a miss, where individuals spoke up and shared that they were feeling a lack of unity, that there was some kind of essential, specific truth that they were seeing in this moment that wasn't being recognized by the whole. So one of our community members, who is a mother of a lone soldier who has been serving in the IDF for the last 3 years and is now in the reserves, stood up during the Q&A and said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing her words, of, you all rabbis and leaders have been talking about all these powerful experiences you had on this trip, but I have hardly heard anything about IDF soldiers, and I haven't heard anything about the lone soldiers who have been serving so bravely. So where are their stories? Why aren't you lifting up their voices? Where were they on your trip? And there was this beat of silence in the room as the whole room felt her pain and the mirror that she held up to us. And moments earlier in the conversation, one of the rabbis stood up and shared from his own perspective, saying something, again, I'm paraphrasing, to the effect of, I want to lift up something that I feel needs to be said here, which is the reality of Israel's ongoing occupation of Palestinians in the West Bank. We need to talk about that elephant in the room too. And if you were here, you remember there were boos and there was applause. And it was this moment, amidst all the unity, of a real sense of, there is difference here. Our congregation, you probably know, you may know, is home to a vast range of different backgrounds and experiences and viewpoints on many things, including on Israel and on Palestine. And as the rabbi, I have this particular unique vantage point where I get to see a lot behind the scenes that is not always apparent in public. You come into my office for Conversation 101, and we go meet for coffee. And over these last 5 months, I have heard you share your grief and your anger, your despair and your confusion, and it takes vastly different forms. Each of you is holding on to a different piece of this larger pain and grief. And I want to just give you kind of a snapshot from where I sit about the totality of our community, of where we're holding pain. So some of you, I see, are holding the pain of Israelis who have been raped and brutalized, terrified for their lives. The thousands who have been forced to flee their homes on the Gaza and Lebanon borders with no indication of when they can return. The mothers and fathers who have buried children, the children who have buried parents. Israelis who refuse to live any longer with a genocidal enemy on their border, who need to have this threat eradicated to return to any semblance of a normal life. Some of you are holding this pain so acutely. Some of you are holding the particular pain of the hostages and their families who have endured 154 days now of captivity and torture. Some of you imagine the faces of little Kfir and Ariel Bibas praying that they are still alive, and the 19 women who are enduring God knows what horrors. Some of you are acutely holding the pain of Palestinian civilians in this moment, used as human shields by their own crazed Hamas leadership, who are starving in this moment and clamoring for food, as we saw last week. Some of you are holding the babies and the children, the parents and the grandparents who are dying by the day under horrific conditions. Some of you are holding immense anger toward Israel's own leadership, who failed its people before 10/7 and still fails to put forth a credible plan for the day after the war that will ensure safety and security and ultimately peace for its people. And some of you are holding immense guilt and shame that so many Palestinian civilians have been killed in order to keep Jews safe without knowing when the war will end. Some of you are holding the pain and fear for your children who are students on college campuses, encountering anti-Semitic threats and jeers, just trying to keep their heads down and live joyful Jewish lives while campus culture has become more and more hostile to Jewish students. And some of you, I know, are holding the particular pain of alienation from family members who see this conflict so differently than you do. The pain of parents and kids who are no longer speaking to each other because of their divergent views on Israel. Or the pain and the challenges everybody grits their teeth and tries to avoid the elephant in the room, or sends each other books and articles to try and be understood by this person that you love so dearly. Some of you are holding the pain of dreams for peace that have been shattered. And some of you are holding the pain of numbness and constriction, of overwhelm, of not knowing how to engage, of needing just to tune out and not feel anything. And I am sure that this is not anywhere close to the entirety of the pain that we collectively as a community feel. Needless to say, it is rather uncomfortable to try and hold the range of this views. I imagine myself sometimes almost like an octopus with 300 arms, trying to kind of put a hand on the shoulder of every single person. And I just want to be able to hold all of you and hug all of you at once. It would be so much more comfortable, and has been so much more comfortable, to focus on where there is unity and consensus. But we would be missing out on the larger truth. So the message I really want you to hear tonight is twofold. One, none of us has the entirety of the truth. But two, each of us carries an essential piece of that truth. None of us has the entire truth, but each of us carries a piece of it. I get worried and nervous when I see efforts to try and silence voices within our own Jewish community or to declare some voices un-Jewish. I understand those silencing efforts as coming from a place of feeling threatened and coming from the fear that those who may in this moment call for a ceasefire, or those who are pointing out Israel's failings are actually giving strength to our enemies, God forbid. And this is a real, valid fear. But I worry that the consequence of silencing these voices, who are also speaking from a place of Jewish values, will be the ultimate fracturing of our Jewish community even further, pushing people farther and farther outside the tent. So I want to ask, and I'm asking myself this question, can we allow ourselves to trust that each of us carries an essential piece of the larger truth, while retaining the humility that no one among us holds truth in its entirety? Can we, like Moshe, invite each and every person to bring that unique contribution for the good of the larger whole? I've heard many rabbis and wise people say over these last 5 months that it is possible to hold multiple truths and multiple people's pain all at once, to have empathy for both Israelis and Palestinians at the same time. But I have to tell you, I have found this myself very hard to do in practice. In my own experience, I'll just share personally, before I left on the trip for Israel about a month and a half ago, I felt my own heart had gotten very small and very numb. It just was exhausted taking in news day after day after day, feeling pain day after day, and I had felt myself for a number of weeks to just disengage, to focus on other things, because I have the luxury and privilege of doing so. And so part of the reason why I felt so compelled to be on this trip was because I wanted to open my heart back up again, particularly to the pain of our Israeli brothers and sisters. And I knew and I felt within hours of arriving there in Tel Aviv and going to Hostage Square and seeing all of these exhibits and this mock tunnel and having some tiny experience of what it must be like, not even close, but I just, the floodgates went open and I felt my heart once again grow and open and expand. And it stayed like that for 6 days and beyond, just holding the stories, trying to hold that pain that Israel is feeling so acutely in this moment. And I came back, and the strongest thing I felt was like, these Americans need to just really like take a dose of humility here, and just listen and just try to hold some of this trauma. But I could tell for myself that in the moments when I was feeling the pain of our Israeli family so acutely and most prominently, I would see, like, can I extend my heart? Can I open my heart and open that wider to the pain of Palestinian civilians too? And it felt like there was a wall there, like behind a curtain. I would see, so many people on the internet crying out and saying, have you seen these photos? Have you read these articles? It's awful. And I felt this block. And I knew intellectually that I wanted to empathize there too, but I couldn't do it while simultaneously empathizing with Israelis. And I read something today that helped me understand this, because I think this is just the reality of our limited human hearts in the midst of deep conflict. Daniel Gordis actually said something to this effect in his newsletter this week. He said, we Israelis want so badly to be able to care about Palestinian lives, but one of the many tragedies of this moment is that our hearts have shrunk, that Hamas has shrunk our hearts, that there's a limit to what our hearts can bear. It reminded me in some way about learning about the Heisenberg uncertainty principle of all random things. If you remember from your 8th grade chemistry class, you can know the position or the spin of an electron at any given moment, but you can't know them both. I felt like, okay, I can only either hold this pain or that pain, but I can't hold them both at the same time, and it's driving me crazy. And I knew I would have to, if I wanted to be able to feel, I would have to set down one in order to hold the other and then keep exchanging. But rather than a weakness of ours, or rather than seeing this as a limitation of the human heart, I want to see this as a strength of holding our hearts in community. I think this is the promise that community offers us, because I can know somewhere in this community right now, like all of those stories I shared at the beginning, somebody is holding that piece of the larger pain that I have trouble accessing. And I'm holding a piece of the pain that maybe you have trouble accessing in this moment. And if we were to gather up the entirety of the community, Vayakel et kol adat b'nei Yisrael, maybe we could hold it all. And so I have a thought about how to do this, and a thought about how to see this collectively that I want to try. For the last 5 months, rather hastily after October 7th, before that first Shabbat that we met together, we put together, I'm sure you've seen, the vigil table outside the door with pictures of hostages and pictures of those who were murdered on October 7th, and candles. And that table has stayed, rather static over the last 5 months. A few people have added things here or there, but organically of their own accord. And so between now and next Shabbat, I want to invite you to bring something that represents the connection and the pain and the grief that you're feeling in this moment. Maybe this is a photograph of somebody who you love, a soldier, someone who was killed, somebody that you have been praying for their safety. Maybe this is, a trinket, a necklace, a pin you bought that represents your most core held Jewish values and commitments. Bring something, or if you don't want to part with it, bring a picture of something that represents how you're connecting in this moment, because I want to be able to visually represent and see the whole of our communal heart. I think this is unity. I think this is what unity could look like and should look like. It doesn't always involve arguing with each other about our core commitments, but it involves seeing each other. So I bless us. Vayakel et kol adat b'nei Yisrael, to gather one another up, to hold each other in all of the pain that each and every one of us is feeling right now, and to be able to build something like a mishkan anew so that we can allow God's presence to dwell among us. Shabbat shalom. We'll rise for Baruch Hu.